This is an example of broomstick crochet lace. Broomstick crochet is worked using an ordinary crochet hook and either a knitting needle, or the old traditional thing would have been a broomstick. As you can see, I've got quite a large size knitting needle here. It's a 20mm. Now this particular sample in front of you has been worked where the loops have been gathered into groups of 4 with a row of double crochet, and I should add I am using British terms, so a row of double crochet gathering the loops together. And I've started with a basic crochet chain. So to demonstrate this, I shall move this sample out of the way. I'm going to start by just working my chain. So I've started with a slip knot on the hook, and because I'm working in groups of 4 loops, I need a multiple of 4 stitches in my chain. So I'm going to work a small sample with 12 chain. So just work a normal chain. I'm not trying to make the chain too tight, so I have kept some tension on my chain as I was working to keep it reasonably loose. So I've now got my 12 chain. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 chain to form the start of my broomstick crochet. So once I've made my chain, I need to pick up my knitting needle or broomstick, and I'm right-handed, so I've got my crochet hook in my right hand and the knitting needle in my left hand, with the knitting needle point pointing towards the crochet hook. And I'm simply going to slip the last loop on the crochet hook onto my knitting needle, and then take the yarn to the back. You may see people demonstrating this in slightly different ways, but this is the method that I'm using. So I now want to pick up a loop through each chain for my 12 stitches, and I'm going to be working under the top leg of the chain. So I'm going to get under this first top leg. It does take a bit of time to get used to this because you're now working with an extra tool, your knitting needle. You do need some tension on your yarn, so I've gone through and I'm going to reach across and pull a loop through and place it onto the knitting needle. I'm then moving down to the next chain, reach across and pull a loop through. I happen to be working with a needle that's a circular knitting needle. Often you will see people demonstrating broomstick crochet and they will be using a long straight needle. So quite often when people first start, they find it's easier to have the knitting needle held vertically, and they clamp it between their knees or between the thighs to hold the needle straight while they work the chain and place it on the knitting needle. But that would be a very difficult demonstration to film in order to make sure you can see what's happening. And this is the method that I tend to use all the time now anyway, because I've got a shorter needle length. So I'm going under each top loop of each chain, pulling a new loop through and placing it onto the knitting needle. Reach across, pull the loop through, place it on the needle. I'm not twisting it on or anything, I'm just going into the top loop, reaching across to grab the yarn and pull it through. Again, you may see this demonstrated in different ways. Some people would go under the top loop and then wrap the yarn around the needle and pull it through. I just find it quicker and easier to just reach across and pull a loop through. As long as you're consistent with whichever method that you use, it doesn't make any significant difference. Just pick a method and be consistent in the way that you work it. So I've got this one last loop here. So again, grab the yarn, pull it through and place the loop on the knitting needle. So I should now have 12 loops. 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. So I've got 12 loops on my broomstick, and I'm now going to, so people often refer to that as row 1 of the pattern, so that is collecting loops and putting them onto the knitting needle as row 1. And now I'm going to work off the loops in groups. The very first group of the row, so again, I find it easier to keep the stitches still on my crochet or my knitting needle, and you can either come up around the back, or if you come in around the front of the loops, which if you pull down slightly, and then I would rotate my hook all the way around to the back, pick up my crochet yarn, and I'm going to work, I find it easier to work, you have to work a chain 1 at the beginning to secure your yarn and your first group of loops. I find it easier to work the chain 1, I'm going to put this back, with the stitches still on the knitting needle. Some people would just take them off and work the chain 1, but you don't want to pull that edge stitch up too tightly, because it will then make this edge of your piece of crochet too short. But I've now done a chain 1 which secures that first group. I now want to work the same number of double crochets into these 4 loops as the number of loops, so that means 4 double crochets. So I'm going to now just work 4 double crochet into the big loop space that's created when I joined the 4 together. So that's 4. So as you can see, if I put it down, I've gathered 4 loops together, and then I've crocheted 4 double crochets across the top. I need to make sure that I have the same number of stitches at the end of this row as I had to start with. I've done the first 4 loops, so I'm now going to take off the next group of 4. And usually once I've done the first group, I take the loops off the knitting needle and pinch them together with my left hand, pull the yarn through, and in fact that one's not in the right place, so I'm just going to grab the 4 again, pull the yarn through the centre so that I know I've got my 4 loops held together, and work another 4 double crochet. So on a larger piece you just continue across the piece working off 4 stitches at a time, and then I've got my last 4 loops here, so I'm going to take them off, drop my knitting needle for the minute, and then I'm going to pull these last 4 through. So I've collected a loop and I'm going to work 4 more double crochet into this last group of 4. So that's completed the row that takes the loops off the needle. You may find that you want to just adjust the positioning of the double crochet to keep the loops in a nice spread. I'm now ready to replace that last loop onto the knitting needle, ready to pick up the next row of loops. So in this next row, again, reposition the yarn. I've already got a loop coming out of that last stitch, so I'm going to go into the next stitch along, and it can vary from different methods, but I'm using the technique where I'm just going under the back chain of the double crochet to pick up my next row of loops. You can work so you go under both chains or the back chain. It's up to you and the finished effect that you may want to achieve. Some instructions will tell you that the correct way is to only pick up through the back loop. Other people will say it's to pick up under both loops. As with most things in knitting and crochet, as long as you're consistent with what you do and you're happy with the finished effect, it's not that important as to which version you do. But I've chosen this time to pick up through the back loop, and by picking up through the back loop you create a little dash ridge between each of your groups of clusters. I've now completed another row of picking up loops, and I would now start my row of double crochet again, and that's all that's involved in broomstick crochet. You're making rows of loops and then you're taking off your rows of loops with, in this case, double crochet to gather them into your decorative shells. That's starting broomstick crochet from a chain.